what you're thinking. You just looked down, seen how many minutes, and thought, what? Well, actually, today we're looking at the heroes of the British Empire, and we'll need to know this stuff for our assessment coming up. So we're going to look at 5 key figures. That's right, I'm talking Nelson, I'm talking Wellington, I'm talking Clive, I'm talking Freemantle, that's right, Freemantle's in there, and I'm talking Wolfe. What a name. What we're going to do is we're going to find out what their successes were and if they had any failures. Now, for this assessment, we need to think about 3 things. Did they make the empire better? If you're going to be a hero of the empire, you need to have made it better. Now, they could achieve this hero status by doing one of 3 things. They could either have defended Britain and her empire. That'd be number 1. Number 2, they made the empire stronger. And by that, we mean richer. That'd be reason number 2. Or, finally, did they defeat Britain's enemies, which at the time would have been France. So one of those 3 things they got to achieve to be hero status. So let's find out. Right, let's start off with Horatio Nelson. Now, the great thing about Horatio Nelson, a little bit like Sir Thomas Freemantle, is that he's very young when he joins the Navy. This time Nelson joins at 12 years old. He becomes a captain in the Navy by the time he's 20, so that's pretty impressive. Not just that, he's been all over the world. He's been to Canada, he's been to the West Indies, heck, he's even been to the Arctic. So he's been and seen a lot of things. Is he having a great time with it? Well, not entirely. When he tries to take Corsica, well, we recognise the name Corsica. Oh yeah, it's where Napoleon's from. So the British Empire decided we're going to capture the island of Corsica. How's that pan out? Well, actually, not too well for poor old Nelson. In that battle, a French guy has a shot at him, hits a stone pings up into his eye and blinds him in the right eye. Pretty rubbish. Gets worse for him though. At the Battle of Tenerife, a few years later, he gets shot in the arm. Bang! He's furious. Asks the medic to have it amputated, and an hour later he's back out there giving out orders, despite having just lost his arm. Incredible. Now, he's mainly famous though for 2 key battles, and that's what we're going to talk about now. The first one happens in 1798, and is the Battle of the Nile. Now, what happens is the French are really keen to capture Egypt, because if they capture Egypt, they'll then be able to move on and capture India, which, as hopefully you'll remember, India is very, very important, it's very, very valuable. So what do the British do? They decide, right, we need to send our key man down there, Horatio Nelson. So they slap him on a boat, send him down to Egypt. Now the Nile, being that huge river in Egypt, is where the French are keeping all their boats. This is really important because the French are going to need their boats to invade India. Also, if things go pear-shaped, they'll need those boats to get them home. So what does Horatio Nelson do? Sails up the Nile in 1798, boom, 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 destroys those boats, then goes home again. Napoleon's gutted, scratching his head, thinks, what the heck am I going to do now? I'm going to have to go home. Not only that, but he's going to have to march home. So he has to go home by land. That takes him ages. So that's key battle number 1. The second battle, which is even more important than that one, is the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. Now, the reason why this all kicks off is because the French are planning to invade Britain. Now, are you thinking, so the Battle of Trafalgar happens at Trafalgar Square in London? No. Trafalgar is actually at the very, very bottom of Spain. It's at the southern tip of Spain. So what's going to happen is the Spanish and the French, because we were working alongside each other at this time, are going to get some boats together, take those boats to the north of France, pick up the huge French army that's waiting for them there, and then cross to Britain. So, what did the English do? You guessed it, they sent Nelson. So Nelson goes down to the very tip of the very bottom of Spain and has a big battle with those boats down there. And it's called the Battle of Trafalgar. Now, how does this pan out? Well, there's 27 British ships versus 33 French and Spanish ships. So who wins? Well, let me tell you this way, let me put it this way. The British lose no ships. The Spanish and French lose 22. And it's not just that. Whilst the British suffer 449 casualties, the French and Spanish almost suffer, almost 10 times that amount, 4,398. So it's a huge victory for the British. Partly it's because Nelson develops new tactics in this battle. Rather than having just one line of ships going down and attacking using the side of their guns, they go in 2 lines, which helps them to circle the enemy. But where it really goes bad for poor old Nelson is he gets shot again by the French. This time it's done really badly. It goes straight through his front, damages his back, and collapses on the deck of the ship. Now it takes him 3 hours to die. They take him below decks, he's talking to his friends, he's giving his last orders, all this while the battle's going on around him. He hears though, just before he dies, that he's been successful. Boom. His last words, God and my is the end of Horatio Nelson.
So Thomas Freemantle, you may have heard of him, a very, very well-known man. He joined the Navy when he was 11 years old. So think of Jeremy Tombs joining the British Navy right at this minute. That's how old he was. He was a captain of a ship by the time he was 25 years old, so a very young captain. And the ship was called Spitfire, which is not as good as that. But anyway, it's called Spitfire. He was a very brave man, was Thomas Freemantle, and he, along with Nelson, got injured in the Battle of Tenerife. Nelson lost his arm, and also Thomas Freemantle got shot in the arm. However, he still kept his arm, but he couldn't use it. So Thomas Freemantle, his crowning glory actually came in the Battle of Trafalgar, where he was captain of a ship called Neptune, still not as good as his arm. He was attacked by the ship called Santissima Trinidad, which was the biggest ship of its time. It was a very, very big ship, a lot bigger than the ship where he was commanding Neptune. Neptune suffered about 44 casualties, but Santissima Trinidad, however, suffered over 300 casualties. So Neptune won that little battle. However, Nelson's ship was badly damaged, so being a good friend to Thomas Freemantle, he actually towed Nelson's ships back to safety. Unlike Nelson though, Thomas Freemantle made it through. What a legend that man is.
Right, let's talk about Robert Clive. Now, Robert Clive is a little bit different to some of the other guys because he's not fighting the Napoleonic Wars, he's fighting the 7 Years' Wars, which, if you remember, happens quite a bit earlier in the 1800s. So, what do we know about this guy? Well, first of all, as a child, he's a bit of a tearaway. He's a terrible child. Teenager years, awful. He gets expelled from 3 schools. That's how bad he is. He also sets up a protection racket. So business people have to pay him money to make sure that he doesn't damage their shops. So he's a very dodgy guy. So much so that his family are fretting about what the heck are we going to do with Rob. So they decide, well, the best thing to do with these kind of guys, send him off to the army. That's give him some discipline. So they send him off to the army, and he goes to India, and this is where he makes his living. He kind of rises up through the ranks of the army. So he's rising up through the ranks of the army, becoming more and more important, so actually military life really suits him. Now he mainly makes his name in the Battle of Plassey. What happens here is 68,000 Indians, given weapons by the French, fight 3,000 British people and Indians in a big battle. Now the French are giving the weapons to Indians because the French really want to control India. We'll talk about that in a second. So huge battle, massively outnumbered, 3,000 British-backed troops versus 68,000 French-backed troops. This is where Robert Clive really comes into his own. In the battle he shows brilliant courage, fantastic tactics, and the British win. Huge victory. Now what makes Clive so good is his brilliance in battle, and also his brilliance as a diplomat. Now, hopefully you'll know that a diplomat is someone who's able to talk to people of different walks of life who might not necessarily have the same worldview. Robert Clive gets on really well with the Indians, makes really good friendships with them. So because of his friendships and his cooperation with them, the British are able to take more and more land and more control over India. So you might be wondering, what's the big deal? What's so great about India? Well, there's 3 things that we get out of India which is really valuable. We get tea, spices and silk. Now we take those things, we take them back to Britain, we sell the tea, and a lot of people, we talked about the 7 Years' War, remember the world loves tea, particularly in America, so we make a lot of money out of that, you whack tax on the tea. Second thing, spices, brilliant, same thing, world's loving spices in their food, whack a tax on it, Britain makes lots of money. And if you remember silks, the British is starting to have a really big clothing industry. People are wanting to buy British clothing. So again, take that silk, turn it into dresses, sell it on for a big profit. Again, British gets very, very rich out of it. So India is extremely valuable, and you can see why the French want it. They want to cut off that money. But the French fail mainly due to the work of Robert Clive. What a little age!
Arthur Wesley, otherwise known as the Duke of Wellington, he joined the army about 1787, and first fought against the French, of all people, in 1796 in India. However, Britain's rule in India came under threat in about 1803. We really didn't want to lose our empire in India to the French. So Duke of Wellington led a British to a very important victory at the Battle of Versailles, effectively ending the threat of collapse in India. Why was that important though, you may say? Well, Britain being in India got loads of things like tea, silk, which they give back to the British public, which was very, very valuable. So it's very important that the Duke of Wellington actually won the Battle of Versailles. The Duke of Wellington, well, his greatest moment was probably the Battle of Waterloo. Come on, Jimmy, even you can remember that, you did it last week. He led the English and the Dutch against the French in the Waterloo in Belgium. If you remember, Wellington's genius in this battle led to a British victory in the capture of Napoleon, and that is extremely significant. This ended the threat of the French, which means that the British Empire was safe.
Right, our next guy is James Wolfe. Now you might not have ever even heard of him before, but that's fine, most people haven't. But back in the 1700s, he's a legend. Now, again, we're talking about the 7 Years' War, not so much the Napoleonic Wars. So what happens? Well, James Wolfe joins the army and is tasked with capturing the French-controlled city of Quebec, which is in, that's right, Canada. So, if you remember, Canada is divided up into the French area and the British area. James Wolfe has been tasked to capture the French area, so he goes after Quebec. Now, loads of generals, British generals, have tried to capture Quebec before and failed. So this is where James Wolfe marks himself out for bravery in particular. He comes up with a plan. He says, right, to capture this great city, we need to use both the navy and the army. So he comes up with this really brave idea. Let's do a sneak attack at night. We'll put our troops onto the ships, we'll sail up to the city, get our troops off and attack the city walls. The French won't know what happened to them. That is exactly what happens. And the battle that follows, the genius French commander who'd been controlling the city of Quebec is killed. Brilliant for the British. The only downside is James Wolfe is also killed in action. Now this is particularly tragic because he's only 32 years old at the time, which is pretty young actually. So why is he so important? Why is he on our list of potential heroes? Well, Canada is extremely important for a couple of reasons. First of all, there's trade. Now, the British trade with the Native Americans who are there in particular to get things like pelts, animal skins, and sometimes even gold. So that's quite valuable in itself. The second, and perhaps even more important reason why the British should control Canada is, remember, the British controlled parts of the 13 colonies in America. If we say, and when we talked about this in lesson, if the Americans have the French as neighbours, what might the French do in the future? The French might go and attack the Americans. So it's really important that the British are able to get rid of the French out of Canada to make sure the Americans are safe. And that's exactly what James Wolfe does. What a ledge. Right, there you have it. The 5 potential heroes of the British Empire. Now all you need to decide is which of those 5 deserves the status of the biggest British hero in the Empire. So remember, we're looking at 3 things in particular. 1. Did they defend Britain and her empire? 2. Did they make the British Empire stronger? And by that, of course, we mean richer. Or 3. Did they defeat Britain's enemy, which of course at the time was France? If they've done one of those 3 things, or even 2 of those 3 things, then perhaps they are worthy of the title of British Empire hero. It's up for you to decide.